Does any member of the defense wish to make an opening statement this time?
I would, Your Honor, on behalf of Mr. Stillwell.
All right, Mr. Schardt, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Max Schardt, and along with my co-counsel, the gentleman with the white hair back there, his name is David Botts. And together we have the honor and privilege of representing Shannon Stillwell. Shannon Stillwell is an innocent man. He's been accused of the murder of Donovan Thomas in 2015. He is not guilty. He's been accused of a murder of Jamal Drinks in 2022. He is not guilty. He has been accused of conspiring to violate the Georgia State RICO law. He is not guilty. Now, I am going to deliver an opening statement that will preview what I believe the evidence will show in this case and the evidence that will come in trial. But before I even start previewing what I believe the evidence will be, I want to discuss with you some preliminary matters regarding this case. The first preliminary matter that I wish to discuss is my client's name. Okay? On the indictment, you will see, when you look at the indictment, that my client is listed as Shannon Stillwell, also known as Shannon Jackson. Okay, and there's a simple explanation for that. You will learn that his mother was a Stillwell, but he was raised by his paternal grandmother, Betty Jackson. So at times he's been a Stillwell, at times he's been a Jackson. He's indicted as Shannon Stillwell. I know him as Shannon Stillwell, but throughout this trial, some people may say Shannon Jackson, some people may say Shannon Stillwell. I may slip up and say Shannon Jackson. But we're talking about the same person, Shannon Stillwell. Second preliminary matter. It has not been lost on me that my client, it's not lost on any of us, that my client is charged with 2 murders in this case. He's charged in 2015, and the evidence will show that he was wrongfully accused. And that case never went to court. He was accused in 2022, wrongfully, based largely on assumptions made about the 2015 case. We plead absolutely not guilty. With our backs straight and our eyes wide open, we plead not guilty to those charges. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, as far as preliminary matters, as you probably have realized through jury selection and the fact that we have some visitors from the press here today and different things about this case, this is somewhat of a unique case. It's drawn some attention. But the thing I want to stress is that this case is no different than any other case in the state of Georgia or the United States of America as far as criminal cases go. And it has the same ground rules as any other case tried in this great union. The ground rules of this case are that the defendant, Shannon Stillwell, and all the other defendants are presumed innocent. The state bears the burden of proving their case against all the accused individually. And the state's burden of proof is the highest burden in our system, beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the state started talking in their opening about about colors. About colors and hand signs and different markers and gang activity and all the rest. And I anticipate that the state will attempt to bring in colors and their belief about what colors mean in this case. Throughout this case, I'm going to ask you to focus on a couple colors as well, just to keep in mind as you hear the evidence. Okay, the first color is dollar bill green. Dollar bill green, as you may guess, is the exact shade of green that the U.S. government uses when printing U.S. currency. And the evidence in this case will show that many of these young men grew up without dollar bill green. The evidence will show, and you'll learn about different areas of Atlanta, Capitol Homes, Jonesboro South, places that have since been revitalized in some ways, but back 15 years ago were not nice places, places in despair, lack of opportunity, poverty, lack of positive role models. You'll hear about Shannon and his upbringing. You'll hear that he grew up in the Forest Cove apartments, which have since been condemned. And he was raised by his paternal grandmother, Betty Jackson. He couldn't live with his mother, who had succumbed to drug addiction, and it was his paternal grandmother, Betty Jackson, who raised him. She raised him in the Forest Cove apartments, and you'll hear that she loved him, poured love into him, called him her sweet thing, and he called her mom because she was mom. You'll hear that despite the love and guidance that Miss Jackson tried to pour into Mr. Stillwell, at the age of 14, without other people providing him guidance, he dropped out of school. And he decided that he wanted to be a rapper. You'll learn about the rap industry in this case. And you'll learn, and you probably already know this, but becoming a rapper is not the same as signing up for a job at Home Depot, where you work for 2 weeks and you get your first paycheck. When you're chasing superstardom in the rap game, those paychecks might not come for a long time. And sadly, they may not come at all. It might be a dead end to nowhere. You'll learn about the vast numbers of young men with the same dream as Shannon and how the supply of potential rappers greatly exceeds the demand for superstar rappers. How it's really a bad occupation to try to get into when it really comes down to it. But Shannon was 14. And you'll hear how he tried to hone his skills and try to make it in the rap game. But you'll hear that Shannon, like many other young men chasing this same dream, weren't making any money. And bills have to be paid. And kids have to eat. And rent becomes due. And in this case, and we're not going to hide from it, the chase of dollar bill green turned into a different shade of green for Shannon and many others. That type of green, that shade of green is called bud green, which is actually a color. You can paint your house bud green. But in this case, of course, bud green stands for marijuana. And you'll hear how Shannon, trying to make it in rap, sold marijuana. The state has alleged in their overt acts, okay? These are acts that they claim prove that there's some RICO conspiracy afoot. You'll hear that on August 23rd, 2013, Shannon was charged with possession of marijuana with intent to distribute, approximately 1 ounce, over 10 years ago. And you'll hear that he pled guilty and did his time. You'll hear that in 2015, in July of 2015, he was charged with possession of marijuana with intent in possession of a firearm. And you'll hear he pled guilty, took responsibility, did his time. You'll hear that in September 25th of 2019, he was arrested and charged with possession of a firearm. And he took responsibility and he did his time. We're not hiding from the fact that Shannon Stillwell has sold drugs. We're not hiding from the fact that he's been found in possession of marijuana. We're not hiding from the fact that he's been found in possession of a firearm, which is always synonymous with selling drugs. Okay? These are his path, his past, his truth, and they were his decisions. His motivation was to make money for him, to live, to pay rent, to eat. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not hiding from the past, but the evidence will show that Shannon's decisions, starting over 10 years ago, had nothing to do with YSL or any other organization. You won't hear evidence that Shannon was selling marijuana and then calling someone from YSL saying, hey, I got some money to support the organization. Or calling Jeffery Williams and saying, hey, I got some money for you, man. No, it was for him. He was a drug dealer. He pled guilty. He did his time. Just like thousands of other people in Atlanta. This has nothing to do with YSL. Has nothing to do with the January 10th shooting of Donovan Thomas. And it has nothing to do with the 2022 shooting of Shamal Drakes. On count one, on this indictment, the state charges Shannon Stillwell with conspiracy to violate the RICO Act. They say on or between January 24, 2013 and the 8th day of May 2022, he and others unlawfully conspired to acquire, maintain directly and indirectly an interest in and control of United States currency and other personal property through a pattern of racketeering. The state in their opening said, further the interests of YSL, further their goals. They also said they endeavored to do a lot of stuff to get them a lot of stuff. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated. And in RICO, the actions need to be part of a racketeering organization, not a drug dealer selling drugs to put food on his own table to afford studio time to chase his dream as a rapper. I'm going to ask you, as a close of evidence, to find Shannon Stillwell not guilty. Count one. Okay. The other color, besides dollar bill green and I guess bud green, that I'd like to talk about is Fulton County blue. Now, Fulton County blue refers to the Fulton County Jail, 901 Rice Street, where people are taken when they're arrested for felony charges in Fulton County. And Fulton County blue refers to the jumpsuits that these individuals wear, the county-issued jumpsuits that are typically navy blue, a deep navy blue, and say Fulton County inmate on the back. You'll hear about the conditions of jail life and Fulton County jail life in particular. And common sense dictates some of this. You're confined to a cell, sometimes with another man sharing that small cell with you. You have no privacy. Use the bathroom in front of men, shower in front of men. You're in fear, danger. You're separated from your family and your loved ones. But most importantly, the men wearing blue, Fulton County blue, they've lost control of their lives. They've lost control of their destiny. Their destiny is now in the hands of the judicial system, in the hands of prosecutors. Ladies and gentlemen, Fulton County blue is going to be a very important color in this case because the state's key witnesses witnesses in this case that they're going to call to testify, that I anticipate that they will call to testify against my client, Shannon Stillwell, when they became involved in this case, they were all wearing the Fulton County blue. When Darius Zachary, Kenneth Copeland, Sammy Davis, Tremont Stillwell, Spencer Wright, will hear them testify if they're called. You'll hear what they've said previously, perhaps. But what you should keep in mind is, when did these men say what they have to say? Did they say it when they first got the information to share? Or when they claim they first got the information to share? Or did they share it when they found themselves wearing the Fulton County blue? When they no longer had control of their destinies and they needed a favor, and they decided to insert themselves into a high-profile case that could solve all their problems. Okay. Let's talk about January 10, 2015. That's the case involving Mr. Thomas. And the evidence will show that this was a high-profile case. And the reason, this is not me talking. I anticipate the evidence will show. I anticipate the state's own witnesses, the state's own gang investigators will tell you, not me talking. I anticipate they will tell you that Donovan Thomas was a big deal, that he was a gang leader, that he was the leader of the Inglewood family Bloods in Atlanta, that he was high-ranking. And that's what made this case a big deal on the streets. You'll also hear that this case, the shooting of Donovan Thomas, was caught on surveillance video. Now, I'm not going to suggest that it's the highest quality surveillance video, but it was caught on surveillance video. And you'll be able to watch the surveillance video. And you'll see McDaniel Street in downtown Atlanta at about 7:20 p.m. on January 10, 2015. Remember, winter, it's cold, dark. And you'll see a car zoom down McDaniel Street towards Northside Drive, headed northwest, I believe. And you will see and you will hear testimony that Mr. Thomas was with other individuals. What they were doing, I don't know. But he was with other individuals in a parking lot in between two barbershops. One being Mr. George's barbershop and one being Mr. Bernard's barbershop. And you will hear that this car zoomed down this dark street on that January 9th, and it appears from the video that you will see that an individual starts shooting out of the sunroof in the direction of Donovan Thomas and others. And you'll see that surveillance video for what it is and what it isn't. And you will also see how quickly everything occurred that night. A matter of seconds. Detective Thorpe is the Atlanta Police Department detective that was assigned this case in January 2015, and you'll hear that he gathered the evidence from the crime scene. There was no DNA, there was no fingerprints of value. You'll hear that there were shell casings all along the street, but you won't ever hear that these shell casings were linked to any particular gun or Shannon Stillwell or anything else. And there were no eyewitnesses on January 10, 2015 coming forward saying, yes, I was here and this is what I saw. And I saw this person do this. There was none of that. And you'll hear that this case remained unsolved. No one had been charged for 9 months and 9 days. On October 19th, 2015, 9 months and 9 days after the Donovan Thomas shooting, a man named Nicholas Robinson was arrested on the streets of Atlanta and brought to Fulton County Jail for various pending charges. And you will hear evidence that Mr. Robinson decided he needed help. He didn't want to wear the Fulton County blue. You'll hear that he contacted Atlanta Police Department and got in touch with Detective Thorpe. And Detective Thorpe came out in an interview with this Nicholas Robinson. You'll hear what Nicholas Robinson said in this interview, how he gave his vantage point to Detective Thorpe, how Nicholas Robinson said that he was seated at the MARTA bus bench right across McDaniel Street from the barber shops. And you'll hear that Nicholas Robinson told Detective Thorpe that he saw it all, and he saw the people that were inside the car. And he gave names. Nicholas Robinson said, "I saw Antonio Sledge. He came out the sunroof shooting. I saw Kenneth Copeland. He was in the front passenger seat. I saw Demetrion Garlington. He was the driver of this car. Quindarius Zachary, he wasn't there, but he supplied the gun to Antonio Sledge. And yes, I saw Shannon Stillwell, my client, in the back passenger side shooting a handgun." So Detective Thorpe, after taking this information from Nicholas Robinson, who just broke the case, created photo lineups. And you'll learn what a photo lineup is. It's essentially 6 photos that contain a picture of a suspect, and then 5 what we call fillers. And you'll learn about that. And Detective Thorpe showed these photo lineups. A photo lineup with Antonio Sledge, and then a photo lineup with Kenneth Copeland. Each person had their own photo lineup, just to ensure that Nicholas Robinson could pick these people out of a photo lineup. And Nicholas Robinson did. And he signed his name, Nicholas Robinson, next to the picture of Antonio Sledge, and next to the picture of Kenneth Copeland, and next to the picture of Demetrion Garlington, and next to the picture of my client, Shannon Stillwell. Nicholas Robinson signed his name and said, "These were the people in the car." Ladies and gentlemen, why am I telling you this? Well, Detective Thorpe had 2 small problems. First, you will see the surveillance video. You will be able to watch the surveillance video and the lighting conditions out there, and the fact that there's gunfire going every which way, and how fast the car is moving, and you will be able to judge, was it ever even believable that someone could see 4 people inside a car under those conditions? But there was a bigger problem that Detective Thorpe had. You'll learn that during this interview with Nicholas Robinson, it wasn't only Detective Thorpe. There was another investigator there, an investigator Gaither. And while Detective Thorpe was talking to Nicholas Robinson, Detective Gaither was doing some investigation of her own and looking into Nicholas Robinson and who this guy was who had just been arrested. And after Nicholas Robinson picked out all these people, including my client, Detective Gaither had to tell Detective Thorpe a little secret. Detective Gaither had to tell Detective Thorpe, that guy in there who just signed those photo lineups that just helped our case, his name isn't really Nicholas Robinson. He lied to us about his name. His name is actually Spencer Wright. So, the case was solved by someone who lied about their name. So, what was Detective Thorpe's solution? Well, this is what the evidence would show. Detective Thorpe completely overlooked the lie about the improbability of a man spotting 4 different individuals in the car moving at a high rate of speed in the middle of the night. He overlooked those things. And he said to Nicholas Robinson, or he said to Spencer Wright, yeah, I've come to learn that your name is not actually Nicholas Robinson, it's Spencer Wright. Could you look at these photo lineups again, and instead of writing a fake name, Nicholas Robinson, could you actually sign it your real name, Spencer Wright? And Spencer Wright did. And what happened? Detective Thorpe, on October 19, 2015, based on the word of Spencer Wright, the man who had just claimed to be Nicholas Robinson, Detective Thorpe took out warrants for Antonio Sledge, Demekion Garlington, Kenneth Copeland, and my client, Shannon Stillwell, based on what Spencer Wright said. Okay. Since October 19th of 2015, people have had an opportunity to review some things on this case. The surveillance video that you will see, it's interesting because not only does it show McDaniel Street and catch the incident, but it also shows the MARTA park bench right across from the barber shops on McDaniel Street. And know who's in the know who's in the park bench? The bus MARTA bench across from the barber shop? No one. It was all fabricated. It was all made up. It was all a lie. We've been able to review Spencer Wright's jail phone calls to associates made around that time. All but admitting, I'm lying. I need to get out of here. I'm inserting myself into a case so I can get favorable treatment, so that others get arrested. The state has since dismissed the charges against Antonio Sledge, Kenneth Copeland, and Demekion Garlington. They continue to push forward against Shannon Stillwell. Why is Spencer Wright so important? Why have I spent so much time talking about someone who clearly lied, who clearly wasn't there, who clearly made things up? Well, Spencer Wright gives us the blueprint. He tells us what to look out for. What was Spencer Wright wearing when he fabricated his story? Fulton County blue. What did he want? What was he in search of when he fabricated his story? Control of his destiny. He didn't want it to be left in the judicial system. He wanted to use something to get a deal. He wanted to take back control. That's what men in blue do. Okay. In this case, I anticipate the state will bring 4 witnesses forward. All 4 have certain things in common, as I stated. When they supposedly came upon information that was relevant, never shared it with law enforcement. But once they were wearing blue and they needed something, that's when they came up with their stories. I anticipate the state will call Quindarius Zachary, ironically, one of the people accused by Spencer Wright. You'll learn that he claims he knew information from January 10, 2015. January, February, March, April, May, never shared this information with anyone. But lo and behold, you'll hear he found himself in custody for serious charges on August 5th of 2015. Then all of a sudden he had a story to tell. You'll hear he gave the second statement to law enforcement approximately a year later, where he was in a room with the gang investigators, with prosecutors, including the prosecutors that were handling his case and had control over his destiny, his future, and his attorney. And you'll hear that he gave a second statement and was looking for a deal. Quindarius Zachary is no longer wearing blue. Quindarius Zachary is not charged in this case. He got his deal. You'll hear about Kenneth Copeland. Again, someone ironically accused by Spencer Wright. You'll hear that Kenneth Copeland hates jail more than anything. The problem is, for someone that hates jail more than anything, he does a horrible job of avoiding it. And you'll hear that throughout this investigation, he's repeatedly arrested by Atlanta Police Department and other jurisdictions. And you'll hear 2 of those arrests were on June 10th of 2015 for guns, found in possession of guns. October 28, 2021, guns, found in possession of guns. And he makes it very clear about what he thinks about wearing the blue. But the interesting thing about him is, as you will hear, is every time he's arrested, law enforcement runs out to talk to him. And he goes through the same song and dance about how he'll do anything. Just please don't make me wear that blue. Kenneth Copeland is no longer wearing blue. And he's not charged in this case. I anticipate you may hear from a man named Sammy Davis, who claims he was at the scene on January 10, 2015. January through December 2015, never once went to law enforcement. 2016, never once went to law enforcement. But then in March 17, 2017, when he's in jail, wearing blue, law enforcement comes out and talks to him. You'll hear his story. His story about how 2 cars were driving down McDaniel Street, and the first car sent a signal to the second car saying, Donovan Thomas is just leaving the barber shop, as a signal like it's time to shoot. And how the second car pulled up in front of the barber shop and stopped in the middle of the street. Just stopped. And then people started shooting at Donovan Thomas. You'll hear Sammy Davis' story. You'll also see the video. You'll see that there's no first car, second car. You'll see that there's no signal. You'll see that Donovan Thomas wasn't just leaving the barber shop, that he had, in fact, like the state had already stated, been hanging out with friends in that parking lot for quite some time prior to the shooting. And most importantly, you'll hear, or you'll see on the video, that Sammy Davis' claims that this car stopped are 100% wrong. The car never stops. The car drives on by. Bullets flying everywhere. You'll be able to listen to Sammy Davis' story and compare it to the surveillance video and figure out how much value you should give his story. And finally, I anticipate you may hear from a man named Shannon Stillwell. A man who curiously claims he's my client's uncle. Not sure what that's about. You'll hear that he claimed to come across important information in January of 2015. And he claimed he came across this important information while talking to someone with his wife, Vanetta Guffey, right there. You'll hear throughout all of 2015, never said a word to law enforcement. Wasn't until March 22nd, 2016. Guess what color Shannon Stillwell was wearing at that time? You got it. When he was in jail for serious charges, and he needed help. He needed help from law enforcement to start to reclaim his destiny, control over his life, to escape the monotony and the filth of the Fulton County Jail. And you'll hear that he claimed to have information. You'll hear that the state, to their credit, went to try to corroborate whatever Shannon Stillwell was talking about and talked to his wife, who is now deceased. Her name is Vinetta Coffey. She is now deceased. But you'll hear that she was interviewed on May 11th of 2016 when she was still alive. And you'll hear what she had to say about Shannon Stillwell's claims. That what he's saying happened, never happened, A, and that Shannon Stillwell is a effing liar. Those are the state's witnesses in this case. Those are their men in blue. Count 2 of this indictment is the count that charges my client, Shannon Stillwell, along with a whole new group of individuals, with the murder of Donovan Thomas. There will be no forensic evidence, there will be no ballistic evidence. There will be no eyewitnesses that presented themselves at the scene to say, I saw this occur. The surveillance video will not give insight as to whether Shannon Stillwell was there or not. The state's case will rest entirely on the word of men in blue. When the evidence is done and trial is done in this case, I'm going to ask that you return a verdict of not guilty to count 2, murder. Okay. Hold on one second, Shannon. Now, I would like to preview a little bit about my client's life after the Donovan Thomas murder. Remember, on October 19th, 2015, the Atlanta Police Department, Detective Thornton, and the news broadcast to the world, and more specifically to the streets, and more specifically to the Inglewood family blood gang that Donovan Thomas was the head of, that my client was responsible. Based on the word of Spencer Wright, based on the word of someone that even the state is saying lied. First they said wasn't completely accurate. No, it was a lie. Based on that, they broadcast to everyone that my client was responsible. And there has been repercussions. You'll hear in 2015, people pulled up to my client as he stood outside a store, shot a gun at his head, and grazed his forehead. Thankfully, he's still with us. You'll hear that later in 2015, my client went to go get a fish dinner with the mother of his child and another young lady named Tiara Jones at JJ's Fish at the corner of University and Pryor. And members of the gang spotted them there, stalked that car, drove behind the car, and unleashed bullets upon that car, hitting that poor lady, the driver, Tiara Jones, in the face, killing her, causing the car to crash and spin, breaking bones in my client's body, collapsing his lungs. The streets have not cared that Spencer Wright is a liar. Since that time, my client's life has changed in some small ways and some big ways that I think make sense. Shannon Stillwell, since that time, has been careful about his surroundings. He tends to back into parking spots. He tends to run red lights at intersections, not to be a sitting duck. for IF gang members or anyone else. He habitually changes residences. And yes, he does habitually rent cars, including a white Audi. He does this, the evidence will show, so no one can associate him with any particular car. None of the IF gang members can know where he is. And yes, when he rents cars, he does tint their windows, so no one can see in. That's the life he leads since 2015. And yes, when he leaves the house late at night, he does conceal his identity. It was during COVID, but he does wear a mask. That's been Shannon Stillwell's life since 2015. And I'm going to ask that you keep that into account as you consider the evidence as it's presented. Now, 7 years later, March 14, 2022, remember, Shannon has been publicly accused, but no one has ever taken that case to court. No one has ever even tried to actually prove the case. They've just accused the case. And Shannon has remained a wanted man. Not by the police, but by someone scarier. On March 14, 2022, the evidence will show that Shannon, Marvius Nichols, Nikion Garlington, and Miles Farley were planning on going to the music studio to work on music. Still chasing it. The evidence will show that Mr. Garlington was a passenger in Mr. Stillwell's and Shannon's rented white Audi with tinted windows, and Mr. Nichols was with Mr. Farley in Mr. Nichols' white Ford Fusion. The evidence, and you'll see, in this case, you'll see there's several different surveillance videos that you'll see in this case. The first being the BP footage. That's from the BP at the corner of Fulton Street and Windsor Street in Atlanta. And you'll see the video. And you'll see Mr. Stillwell. No, we will never deny that he was at the BP. We will never deny that. We'll never deny that he was in a rented white Audi. And you'll see Mr. Stillwell pull up on that camera and back into a parking spot right in front of the BP. And you will see Mr. Nichols shortly thereafter in his white Ford Fusion pull up at the gas tank so he can purchase gas to get to the studio. You will see footage from inside of the store. That's Mr. Nichols. You'll find out that that's Mr. Nichols purchasing an item, and that's Mr. Stillwell, my client, wearing a Pink Floyd hoodie with a pink wool cap on. And you'll be able to observe them on video, and you'll see Miles Farley, a third person in their group, a shorter individual, come in, and you'll see them playing around and pushing each other in a playful manner as friends do. I'm going to ask you to observe them on a video and ask yourself, does that appear to be men on a mission? Or does it appear to be friends just planning on going to the studio? The video will reveal that at some point, a gentleman by the name of Shamal Drinks pulls up in a red car at another, in fact, I believe that's a picture of it right there at that gas pump, and he enters the store. You'll be able to see the video of him entering the store from the parking lot, and you'll be able to see him inside the store. You'll see that he gets into some sort of argument or altercation, not an altercation, an argument. It appears with the clerk, and he leaves the store, and he gets in his car. There will be no interaction whatsoever between Mr. Drinks and my client, Mr. Drinks and Mr. Farley, Mr. Drinks and Mr. Nichols, Mr. Drinks, and Mr. Garlington. There'll be no interaction at all. And you will see Mr. Drinks exit that parking lot and take a right on Windsor Street. And then you will see Mr. Stillwell exit that parking lot and take a right on Windsor Street. And then you'll see Mr. Nichols exit the parking lot and take a right on Windsor Street. And that's where the FedEx surveillance footage will take over. And you'll be able to watch the FedEx footage on Windsor Street, which will show these cars drive up and end up at a red light. You will see my client's car, white Audi, run a red light. You will see Mr. Nichols follow my client's car and run a red light. Eventually, cars come in to replace him, and traffic flow continues and continues for several minutes. And eventually, a man who's just happened to be going the other way looks into Mr. Drinks' car, which is still sitting there, and notices that Mr. Drinks has been shot. What you will not see on this video is any indication at all that this shooting occurred while my client's car was beside Mr. Drinks. You will not see any muzzle flash, you will not see any commotion, you will not see any fight, you will not see anything at all that suggests that that's when the shooting occurred. So, this March 14, 2022 case, what I anticipate is you will not hear any eyewitnesses say that Shannon Stillwell, and let's be clear, the state is accusing Shannon Stillwell. I mentioned that there's 4 people in this party. They are accusing Shannon Stillwell of shooting Mr. Drinks out of that white Audi. The state will not present to you any witnesses that saw this occur. The state will not present to you any forensic evidence that proves that this occurred. The surveillance I submit to you, and you'll be able to see and judge for yourself, points to the exact opposite, that the shots did not come from Mr. Stillwell's car, nor did, and I'm not suggesting they came from Mr. Nichols either, they came from neither car. So why was Shannon Stillwell arrested? Well, they had video of Shannon at the BP. Okay, that's fine, we don't deny that, never will. They made certain assumptions about what would be on that FedEx video that you will be able to look at and determine what it shows and what it doesn't show. And I'm sure they assumed that it would show some shooting, but it doesn't. And finally, they made assumptions about Shannon Stillwell. Remember what the state said in opening about how Detective Hogan had this case. He had people on a video at the BP, which is near where the shooting occurred, but not where the shooting occurred. He had people on his video, and then he talked to another detective, Viverito, and Viverito said, "Oh, that's Shannon Stillwell. That's Shannon Stillwell. Oh, that's Marcus Nichols." And they just ran with it. Yeah. Shannon Stillwell was at the BP that night. He didn't shoot Shamal Drinks. None of his friends shot Shamal Drinks. They went to the studio. Since these warrants were taken out for Shannon Stillwell, and I'll tell you the warrants were taken out and Shannon Stillwell was arrested in that same white Audi on March 17, 2022, 3 days later. Since those warrants have been taken out, some other information has come forward. First, I'm going to ask you, and you will, this will be entered into evidence, I'm going to ask that you consider the rental agreement for the white Audi. You will learn that on March 16, 2 days after this alleged shooting, when every other person who has a guilty conscience, anyone who has a guilty conscience is trying to get out of the rental car, Shannon extended his lease. I'm going to ask you to consider and really think about that. Extending a lease of a car that you supposedly just killed someone. Are those the actions of someone who's guilty of that crime? You're going to hear about the wiretap on Demekion Garlington's phone. Remember, Demekion Garlington was in Mr. Stillwell's car. And the state hinted at it a little bit. They were talking about Jaden Myrick and people wanting to attack a man named Lucci. And based on these concerns in the jail, the state applied for it, and you'll learn what a wiretap is. They applied for a wiretap and received a wiretap for Demekion Garlington's phone. The phone of the person who was with Shannon Stillwell on March 14, 2022. And you'll learn what a wiretap is and how a wiretap really consists of law enforcement sitting and listening in on all your phone calls, incoming and outgoing, and recording all the relevant and pertinent phone calls and conversations that occur. You'll learn that this wiretap on Demekion Garlington's phone began on March 10th, but certainly well before March 14th, the date of the Shamal drink shoot. So it was in place that night. Who knows about the wiretap? You'll learn that too. Do you think the government tells you that your phone is being wiretapped? Of course they don't. It's secret. No one knows. That's the point. And you'll learn about who Demekion Garlington is and what type of guy he is. I would submit, if you have a secret, you wouldn't want to tell Demekion Garlington. You'll hear him on the wiretap, drunk, high, talking about everything under the sun. Pills, weed, guns, girls, robberies, all stuff that he's involved in, completely against his interests to discuss, but he doesn't know he's being listened to now. But one thing that's interesting, of all the things that this loudmouth talks about, all the crimes, and the state said they bragged about this stuff. State said Demekion Garlington was bragging about this stuff. All the things they brag about, no, it never comes up. Shooting anyone on March 14, 2022. All the crimes he discusses, that never comes up. Finally, and most importantly, the science about this March 14, 2022 case. We're going to learn about gunshot residue. Gunshot residue testing. Testing that tests for microscopic particles that contain a combination of lead, barium, and antimony. Particles that come from the explosion of a gun and the gunshot primer that causes it. Synonymous with a firearm that has been fired. Who does gunshot residue testing? Georgia Bureau of Investigation, APD, all sorts of agencies to build cases against defendants. You'll learn how gunshot residue is collected. How you take a surface or a body part or an object, and you take these adhesive stubs, these official gunshot residue kits, and you dab the surface of an item as much as you want. You can use multiple stubs. And then you take these stubs and you place them under an electron microscope. And a scientist can look under this microscope and see if there's any particles of gunshot residue that are on said item. You'll hear that Shannon Stillwell was arrested on March 17th in that same white Audi that he was in on the 14th. And you will hear that the crime scene technicians, in this case, made a specific decision to pick the best place on a car to test for gunshot residue. When the gun is fired, the gunshot residue would plume upwards. And so they take the best part of the car, the headliner. And for all of you that don't know what the headliner is, that's the cloth top of the car, as pictured right there. You'll hear about Alexander Coven, a scientist, a man in search of the truth, a man who works for GBI, not for me, not for Shannon Stillwell. And you'll hear how that headliner that was collected from that white Audi on March 17th was brought to Alexander Coven at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And you'll hear he's an expert in gunshot residue collection and analysis and detection. And you'll hear how Mr. Coven, as he was trained, took that gunshot residue kit and took those adhesive tabs and dabbed that headliner again and again and again and again and again and again, dozens of times. And then he wanted to make sure what he did was sufficient. So he took a second tab, adhesive tab, a fresh one, and continued to dab that headliner again and again and again and again and again to pick up any particles that would be on the headliner from that white Audi. And he took those tabs, those adhesive tabs, and he put them under his microscope that he uses when he's building cases for the state. And he looked at those tabs under that microscope for any particle of gunshot residue, any at all. Looking for 15, 10, 5, 3, 1, whatever he could see. And you'll hear that on June 3rd, 2022, 77 days after the state, after Detective Hogan, Investigator Viverito, and the state made their decision that Shannon Stillwell fired a gun from that white Audi, 77 days after they made that decision, you'll hear that scientist Coven released his report. And on that headliner, there was not a single, zero gunshot residue to be found. That's the science. Ladies and gentlemen, regarding the March 14, 2022 case, the state has made 5 charges, 5 different counts against Shannon Stillwell, my client. First is count 49 on this indictment. It is murder, alleging that he shot out of the white Audi, his shot Shamal Drinks. The science belies those accusations. I'm going to ask you to find Shannon Stillwell not guilty of that count. Now, count 50 and 51 deal with violations of the Criminal Street Gang Act, Gang Activity Act, and they are essentially charges that say that Mr. Stillwell committed murder to further the interests of YSL, and he committed murder on behalf of YSL for the purposes of increasing his standing within the gang. Y'all are smart people. Obviously, I don't need to say it, but it'll make me feel better if I say it. If he's not guilty of count 49 murder, he cannot be guilty of count 50, and he cannot be guilty of count 51. Counts 52 and 54 similarly charge Shannon Stillwell with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon on March 14th of 2022 on the belief that he used a firearm to kill Shamal Drinks. If the state does not prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, he cannot be found guilty of count 52. And in count 54 charges Shannon Stillwell with possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, that felony being murder. Obviously, if he didn't commit the murder, then he cannot be in possession of a firearm during the commission of said felony. In conclusion, my client has been charged with 2 separate murders. He's been wrongfully accused of 2 separate murders, and we plead absolutely not guilty. He's been charged with conspiracy to violate the RICO Act. And while he has sold marijuana in the past, those were his decisions, for his benefit, and had nothing to do with YSL or anyone else involved in this case. He's pled guilty to those charges. He's done his time. That makes him an ex-drug dealer. It doesn't make him a conspirator. It doesn't make him guilty of violating any RICO acts. The ground rules. Shannon Stillwell is presumed innocent. The state bears the burden of proof, and the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. I believe in this case, if you focus on where the state's evidence comes from, you will find that primarily it comes from the stories of men wearing blue. I'm going to ask you to focus on things like science instead of stories. Compare the credibility of a scientist like GBI scientist Kobe, who followed all the rules and determined there was absolutely 0 gunshot residue in that outfit. Compare that to what the state presents. Spencer Wright, who said his name was Nicholas Robinson, who lied to get out of jail. Spencer Wright duped Detective Thorpe on October 19th of 2015, and that is on Detective Thorpe. I am going to do my best to make sure that the truth comes out in this case. Make sure that no one wearing blue will be able to dupe anyone during this trial. My client, Shannon Stillwell, is not guilty. Thank you very much.